There are moments on live television that nobody plans. Not the producers. Not the hosts. Not the publicists who spent hours preparing talking points and segment transitions and carefully managed guest appearances. Nobody plans the moments that actually matter. And on a Friday morning in a brightly lit studio in New York City, one of those unplanned moments happened. It lasted about 4 seconds. It was one sentence. And it brought the entire studio down. Joy Behar, Brooklyn-born, comedian, television legend, the woman who has been sitting at the View table through every cultural shift and political earthquake of the last 3 decades, said something she probably thought was perfectly reasonable. She said, "I think 50 is the cutoff." The woman at that table who has spent her entire career saying exactly what she thinks in exactly the way she thinks it, turned to look at Joy. And said 5 words. 5 words that the internet replayed and quoted and screenshot for days afterward. 5 words that made the audience erupt, made the co-hosts lose their composure, made Joy Behar herself start laughing in spite of everything. Who died and made you the Virgin Mary? Stay with me. Because there is a whole story underneath that joke. A story about women and age and confidence and the ridiculous, beautiful, complicated business of getting older in America. A story about what it means to still be standing, still be loud, still be unapologetically yourself when the world keeps suggesting that maybe you should tone it down a little. This is the story of one line. And everything it opened up. To understand why Anna Navarro's line landed the way it landed, you first have to understand Joy Behar. Joy Behar is a specific kind of American original. She was born in Brooklyn in 1942. That fact alone tells you something. Brooklyn in 1942 was not a place where you learned to be delicate. It was a place where you learned to be fast. Where the currency of daily life was wit. The ability to get to the punchline before anyone else. To say the thing that everyone was thinking before they had the courage to say it. To find the truth that was funny and hold it up so everyone in the room could see it. She grew up in a household where having opinions was not a flaw. It was a survival skill. Where the dinner table was not a place for polite silence but for argument, the warm, affectionate, slightly chaotic argument of people who trusted each other enough to disagree. That upbringing produced a woman who has never quite learned to edit herself. Which is, depending on who you ask, either her greatest gift or her most infuriating quality. Often both, sometimes in the same sentence. She became a comedian. She taught school for a while first, because that was the practical choice. But the comedy was always there. The need to name things. To find the joke hiding inside the truth and the truth hiding inside the joke. She found her way to the View in its early years. And she has been there, on and off, for most of the show's existence. She has outlasted co-hosts and controversies and the entire transformation of the media world around her. She has survived moments where people said she went too far and moments where people said she did not go far enough. She is, at this point in her life, an institution. Which means that when Joy Behar drops an opinion at that table, people listen. Even when they disagree. Even when what she is saying is, by any reasonable measure, a little bit audacious. Like telling a room full of women that 50 is the cutoff. To understand why Joy said what she said, you need to know what they were talking about. They were talking about Madonna. Madonna Louise Ciccone. One of the most significant artists of the last 40 years. A woman who has sold hundreds of millions of records and transformed herself artistically more times than most people change careers. A woman who has been provocative and brilliant and occasionally exhausting and always interesting. She was 66 years old at the time of this story. And she had spent most of those 66 years being very public about her body, her sexuality, her relationship to both. The cone bras from the Blonde Ambition tour. The sex book. The erotica era. Decade after decade of deliberate, calculated, artistically intentional provocation. And then she gave an interview. And in that interview, she said something that was, by her own extremely high standards of surprise, actually surprising. She said, "I don't want to be naked anymore." She said, "Everybody is naked. I want to do what people are not doing." which is thinking, and wearing clothes. The View segment producers saw this and did what View segment producers do. They put it on the show. Because Madonna announcing her retirement from nudity is exactly the kind of cultural moment this show was built for. It is funny and it is real, and it opens up the kind of conversation that starts as gossip and becomes, if you follow it far enough, something genuinely interesting. And then Anna Navarro, preparing for the segment, opened her Instagram. And there was a picture of Madonna, posted the day before, in something so sheer that, as Anna described it with her characteristic directness, she was practically seeing Madonna's most private regions right there on her phone screen. The table erupted. Madonna had declared her retirement from nudity in the morning and posted a visual counter-argument by lunchtime. Sunny Hostin said, she changed her mind. Anna said, by lunch. It's Madonna. She can do whatever the Hemingway she wants. That phrase, whatever the Hemingway she wants, is Anna Navarro deploying a very specific creative substitute for a word she chose not to say on daytime television. And the fact that she used Ernest Hemingway as her substitute tells you everything about Anna Navarro's particular brand of chaos. The table was already laughing. And then Joy Behar said it. I think 50 is the cutoff. She said it the way you say something you have been thinking for a long time and finally found the moment to share. Not tentatively. Not as a question. As a declaration. As if it had been established somewhere and agreed upon and was not really open for serious debate. After 50, the calculation changes. After 50, you make different choices. After 50, you accept the reality of what time does to a body and you adapt accordingly. Now, the women sitting at that table were not all the same age. They were spread across the decades in ways that made Joy's statement land differently for each of them. Sarah Haynes, younger, with the perspective of someone who was not yet having that conversation personally but could see it coming on the horizon the way you see the shape of a mountain from a long way off. Alyssa Farah Griffin, in her 30s, with the particular luxury of someone for whom 50 is still abstract enough to discuss theoretically. Sunny Hostin, who has never made a secret of the fact that she believes women should be free to make their own choices about their own bodies at any age, and who was not about to let that statement pass without at least a raised eyebrow. And Anna Navarro. Anna Navarro, who was not going to let it pass at all. Anna Navarro, who had a response ready before Joy had even finished the sentence. Anna Navarro, who understood instinctively that what Joy had just said was the kind of thing that needed to be met with exactly one specific kind of energy. Not anger. Not a lecture. Not a carefully worded rebuttal about body autonomy and ageism and the cultural pressures placed on women. A joke. The perfect joke. The kind that lands because it is true and funny at the same time and leaves the person it is aimed at laughing along with everyone else because there is nothing else to do. Who died and made you the Virgin Mary? 5 words. That is all. But let us slow down and actually look at those 5 words, because they are doing an extraordinary amount of work. Who died and made you? That is the setup. That is the structure borrowed from the very old, very satisfying rhetorical question, who died and made you the boss? Who gave you the authority? Who appointed you? There is something in that phrasing that immediately deflates the person it is aimed at, because it questions the premise of their authority before engaging with the content of what they said. It does not say you are wrong. It says you are not qualified to be right. And then the Virgin Mary. The Virgin Mary. Not just the boss. Not just the authority. But the specific, particular, unmistakably Catholic, deeply Italian-American, absolutely Brooklyn-inflected reference to the Mother of God. The ultimate symbol of female modesty and restraint and covering up and keeping it together and presenting yourself to the world in a manner that does not invite commentary. Anna Navarro, who is Nicaraguan-American, who grew up Catholic, who knows exactly what she was reaching for, aimed the most perfectly calibrated religious reference directly at Joy Behar, who is also from an Italian-American Catholic background. Who absolutely understood the specific flavor of what she was being called. You are not the Virgin Mary, Joy. You are not the arbiter of female modesty. You do not get to draw the line at 50. Who gave you that job? Who decided? 5 words. And all of that underneath them. The studio exploded. Not polite laughter. Not the controlled, measured response of an audience being professionally appreciative. Real laughter. The kind that happens when something genuinely surprises you and you have no choice but to respond. Joy Behar herself started laughing. Because that is the other thing about a perfectly thrown joke. Even the person it is aimed at has to appreciate it when it lands that cleanly. There is a craft to it. And Joy Behar has been a comedian long enough to recognize craft. She laughed. And then she tried to defend herself, because Joy Behar does not give up that easily. She said, "I don't even like the doctor to see me naked. I bring a blindfold." Which made everyone laugh again. Because that, too, is funny. That is Joy Behar finding a way to turn her own exposure into material. To take the joke that was aimed at her and redirect it. To survive it by making it funnier. That is a comedian's instinct. And even in the moment of being roasted, Joy Behar was still a comedian. But let us go back to Anna for a moment. Because the Virgin Mary line was the headline. It was the moment everyone remembered. It was the screenshot and the clip and the comment and the share. But what Anna said after it was, in some ways, more interesting. She said, "If I had the thigh gap that Madonna has, I would be out there in 2 coconut shells and a Band-Aid. 2 coconut shells and a Band-Aid." This is important for several reasons. First, because it is funny. Obviously. The image alone is worth the price of admission. The specificity of it, not just provocative clothing, not just revealing clothing, but the absolute minimum possible coverage expressed in the most tropical, beachy, summery terms available. 2 coconut shells. A Band-Aid. That is the whole outfit. That is Anna Navarro's answer to Joy Behar's cut-off rule. But second, and more importantly, because of what it reveals about Anna's actual position on the question. She is not making an argument about what women should do. She is not saying Madonna is right or Joy is wrong in any philosophical sense. She is making a personal statement. A conditional one. If I had the body, she is saying, I would make the choice. The limit is not age. The limit is not some invisible line drawn at 50 by some unnamed authority. The limit, if there is one, is practical. It is personal. It belongs to the individual woman in the individual moment. That is a much more interesting and honest answer than either the age-based rule Joy proposed or a blanket declaration that all women should feel free to do anything at any age. Anna was saying, it depends. And the thing it depends on is not a number. It is a woman's own relationship with her own body in her own life. Sarah Haynes picked up on this immediately. She said, I feel clothes give me confidence. Not, clothes are what women should wear. Not, covering up is the right choice for everyone. But, for me, personally, in my experience, the clothing is the thing that makes me feel like myself. The clothing is my armor and my expression and my confidence. I am not a hoochie shower anyway. That phrase, I am not a hoochie shower, is one of the most Sarah Haynes things Sarah Haynes has ever said. And it landed because it was genuine. Because she was not performing modesty. She was describing herself accurately and humorously in a way that made everyone at the table feel like they knew her a little better. And Alyssa Farah Griffin pointed at something that the whole conversation was circling around without quite saying. She said, there are actually more performers who keep their clothes on now than before. She mentioned Billie Eilish. A young artist who built her entire early career specifically on not using her body as part of her brand. Who covered up deliberately, as a statement. What was the statement? You can just sing. You do not have to be naked. That is its own kind of freedom. Not the freedom Madonna claimed, which was the freedom to show everything. But the freedom to show nothing that you did not choose to show. To make the music the thing, not the body. To decide that your art is enough. Let us step back for a moment. Because the conversation that happened at that table, the funny, light, celebrity gossip conversation about Madonna and coconut shells and the Virgin Mary, was actually sitting on top of something much older and much heavier. The history of other people deciding what women should do with their bodies. This history is long. It is detailed. It covers every culture and every century and every corner of the human experience. And one of its consistent features, across all that variation, is the confidence with which the people doing the deciding have always approached the task. They have always been certain. In the 1800s, they were certain that women needed to cover their ankles. Not a suggestion. A moral certainty. A social requirement. The ankle was the thing that had to be hidden, for reasons that were explained in terms of modesty and decency and the protection of social order. In the early 1900s, they were certain that the swimsuit needed to cover the knee. Inspectors on beaches in some cities literally measured the distance between the swimsuit hem and the knee. With tape measures. Because someone had decided, with complete confidence, where the line was. In the 1950s, they were certain that the appropriate female body was a very specific shape that required a very specific kind of undergarment to achieve. And the women who did not have that shape, or who did not want to torture themselves into it, were deviating from a standard that someone, somewhere, had established with complete authority. And now, in 2025, Joy Behar was certain that 50 is the cutoff. Now, Joy Behar is not a Victorian ankle inspector. She is a comedian making a casual observation at a morning talk show. The situations are not equivalent. But the structure of the thing is the same. Someone deciding, with confidence, where the line is for everyone. And Anna Navarro's joke, all 5 words of it, was the sound of that structure being punctured. Who gave you that authority? Who appointed you? Who died and made you the Virgin Mary? The joke was funny. And it was also, underneath the funny, a question with some actual weight to it. On what basis do we decide these things? Whose comfort are we protecting when we draw these lines? Who benefits when women are told that a certain age is the limit, that a certain body shape is acceptable, that a certain level of visibility is appropriate? These are not questions The View answered in that segment. They are morning television, not a philosophy seminar. And the conversation moved on, as conversations at that table always do, to other things. But the questions were asked. In 5 words. And then in everything that followed. Sunny Hostin said something after Joy drew the 50 cutoff line that deserves its own moment. She said, J-Lo is in her 50s. 3 words. Delivered with the particular precision of someone who has just introduced a piece of evidence that, she believes, should settle the matter. Jennifer Lopez. Who is, depending on when you are reading this, in her mid-50s. Who has been one of the most photographed and discussed bodies in American popular culture for 3 decades. Who has made no secret of the fact that she works extremely hard to maintain her physical condition. Who has performed in outfits at the Super Bowl that were discussed for months afterward. Who is, by any measure, a counterexample to the idea that 50 is the cutoff for anything. And then Anna Navarro added Martha Stewart. Martha Stewart. Who in 2023, at the age of 81, appeared on the cover of Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue. Making her, at that point, the oldest person ever to appear on that cover. In a swimsuit. Looking, by any reasonable assessment, remarkable. Martha Stewart. Who is most famous for cooking and crafts and home organization. Who has a very specific brand that is about a certain kind of domestic perfection and gracious living and making everything around you beautiful. Who nobody would have predicted would end up on the Sports Illustrated swimsuit cover. Except Martha Stewart apparently had no interest in being predictable. She was 81. She did it. And the conversation about it was enormous. Because it challenged, directly and visibly and undeniably, the idea that there is a cutoff. That there is an age after which a woman is supposed to step back and cover up and accept invisibility as the natural order of things. Martha Stewart, at 81, declined to accept that. And so Anna Navarro, sitting at the View table, lobbed Martha Stewart into the conversation the way you lob a grenade into a debate you want to end. Because what do you say after Martha Stewart? What version of the cut-off argument survives contact with the image of Martha Stewart at 81 on the Sports Illustrated cover? Joy Behar, to her enormous credit, did not try to argue with it. She laughed. She said something about how she does not even want the doctor to see her naked. She leaned into her own position not as a universal rule but as a personal preference. Which is, ultimately, the honest answer. The only honest answer. What works for Joy Behar is what works for Joy Behar. What works for Martha Stewart is what works for Martha Stewart. What works for Madonna is what works for Madonna. And none of them get to draw the line for all women everywhere. That is the actual point. That was always the actual point. The laughter in that studio was real. I want to make sure that lands properly. Because laughter on television is sometimes not real. It is sometimes the trained response of an audience that has been coached to respond, that has been warmed up, that has been told when to clap and when to cheer and when to respond. But the laughter in that moment, when Anna Navarro said "Who died and made you the Virgin Mary," was not that. You could hear the difference. It was the laughter of surprise. Of something landing that nobody was prepared for. The kind of laughter that happens involuntarily, that comes from the body before the brain has caught up. The kind of laughter that is also recognition, that double feeling of "oh that is funny" and "oh that is true" happening simultaneously. And what was being recognized? I think several things at once. The ridiculousness of arbitrary rules about women's bodies. The specific, deeply satisfying experience of watching someone puncture a confident declaration with a perfectly aimed joke. The particular pleasure of seeing Joy Behar, who is usually the one doing the puncturing, get punctured. The warmth of watching a group of women who clearly have genuine affection for each other have a real, unscripted, human moment. All of that was in the laughter. And the audience recognized all of it. Not consciously. Not analytically. But the way the body recognizes something true, with a full, genuine, involuntary response. That laughter was joy. Not ironic joy. Not polite joy. Actual, real, in the moment, something is funny and real joy. And in a world that is often very short on that particular commodity, on genuine, uncomplicated, real joy, a roomful of women laughing together at a perfectly thrown joke is not a small thing. It is, in fact, a rather beautiful thing. There is something about Anna Navarro that I want to spend some time on. Because the Virgin Mary line did not come from nowhere. It came from a specific kind of person with a specific relationship to what other people think. Anna Navarro does not, at this stage of her life and career, appear to spend a great deal of energy worrying about whether people approve of what she says. This is not an accident. This is a cultivated position. The result of years of being in public life, of being criticized from multiple directions simultaneously, too liberal for some Republicans, too conservative for some Democrats, too loud for some people, too blunt for others, and arriving at the other side of all that criticism with the simple, liberating conclusion that you cannot please everyone, so you might as well please yourself. She says what she thinks. With warmth, generally. With humor, almost always. But without the constant internal negotiation that many public figures engage in before opening their mouths. The calculation of how this will land, who will be upset, what the response will be. She skips that calculation. And the result is that when she speaks, it sounds like a person speaking. Not a brand. Not a strategic communication. Not a carefully managed public persona. A person. With opinions. And warmth. And the ability to say "Who died and made you the Virgin Mary" to a colleague she has genuine affection for, in front of a studio audience, on live television, and have it land as love rather than attack. Because it was love. Complicated, irreverent, slightly chaotic love. The kind of love that does not require agreement. The kind that can roast you and hug you in the same motion. That is a gift. The ability to say the true thing to the people you care about in a way that makes them laugh rather than flinch. The ability to puncture a pretension without puncturing a person. Anna Navarro has that gift. And on that Friday morning, she used it perfectly. Let us go back to Madonna for a moment. Because I think the segment started with her and she deserves more than a footnote. Madonna saying she does not want to be naked anymore is interesting for what it says about where she is in her life and career. She has spent 40 years being provocative. Not accidentally provocative. Deliberately, strategically, artistically, calculatedly provocative. She studied what shocked people. She engaged with it. She pushed it. She used her body as part of her artistic vocabulary in a way that was genuinely novel when she started and has since become so standard in pop music that it barely registers anymore. And now she is saying, everybody is naked. I want to think. I want to wear clothes. This is not Madonna getting conservative. This is not Madonna retreating. This is Madonna being Madonna, which means always being one step ahead of what everyone expects. The provocation now is not nudity. The provocation now is coverage. Because in a world where nakedness has become the default mode of pop stardom, choosing to be covered is the unexpected move. The challenging move. The move that makes people talk. She has always been the person who does the unexpected thing. And when she posted that Instagram the same day, the one in which she was, as Anna described it, basically entirely visible, she was not being hypocritical. She was being Madonna. Madonna contains multitudes. She reserves the right to change her mind between breakfast and dinner. She does not owe anyone consistency. She is an artist and artists are allowed to contradict themselves on a daily basis if that is what the work requires. The interesting thing is not that she said one thing and did another. The interesting thing is that she still, at 66, has the cultural power to generate this conversation. To make a statement in an interview that becomes a segment on a major talk show. To post a picture that gets screenshot and shared and discussed by millions of people who have opinions about it. That cultural power, that ability to remain relevant, to remain discussed, to remain the person whose choices generate conversation, is not accidental either. It is also part of the work. It is also the result of 40 years of understanding exactly how the culture works and exactly how to position yourself within it. Madonna at 66 is still doing it. Still working the room. Still making people pay attention. And in doing so, she handed The View the perfect launching pad for a conversation that turned out to have almost nothing to do with her. She handed them the opportunity for Anna Navarro to say who died and made you the Virgin Mary. And for that, at least, we should probably be grateful to her. Let me say something true for a moment. Getting older is not what you expect. When you are young, you have a mental image of what older looks like. It is built from the older people around you, from the cultural images you absorb, from the stories you hear. And it is, almost always, an image from the outside. The way older looks from the perspective of someone who is not yet there. From the outside, older looks like a set of limitations. Like a set of things that are no longer available. Like a gradual narrowing of possibilities. That is the outside view. The inside view is different. People who are inside getting older, who are living it rather than observing it, very often describe something that the outside view does not capture. A kind of freedom that accumulates with age. The gradual falling away of things that used to feel important and now do not. The approval of strangers. The achievement of a certain kind of conventional attractiveness. The maintenance of an image that required constant effort and attention and that turns out, when you finally stop maintaining it, to have been costing you a great deal. People who are inside getting older often describe feeling, for the first time, like themselves. Not the constructed self. Not the performed self. The actual, underneath everything, this is who I am self. Joy Behar is that self. She has always been somewhat that self. She was never someone who performed approval seeking very convincingly. But at her age, she is completely that self. She says what she thinks. She wears what she wants. She brings a blindfold to the doctor if she wants to. Anna Navarro is that self. She has the energy of someone who has genuinely stopped caring about what is appropriate and started caring only about what is true and what is funny. She will say 2 coconut shells and a band-aid on live television because it is what she is actually thinking, and the filter between her brain and her mouth has been upgraded to only catch things that are genuinely harmful rather than merely unexpected. Martha Stewart at 81 is that self. She did not go on the Sports Illustrated cover because she was trying to prove something to the culture. She did it because she wanted to and she could, and those 2 reasons were sufficient. This is the thing about getting older that the cut-off argument misses entirely. The cut-off argument assumes that getting older is a process of diminishment. That things are taken away. That the options narrow. But a lot of women who are inside it describe the opposite. They describe things being added. Specifically, the thing called not caring what other people think. The thing called being comfortable in your own skin in a way that was not available when you were younger and more anxious and more invested in external approval. That is not nothing. That is, actually, quite a lot. And Joy Behar's cut-off at 50 misses all of it. Because it is drawing the line at the moment when a lot of women are just beginning to access the freedom that comes with age. It is worth taking a moment to picture the studio. Friday morning. Summer. The kind of light that comes through New York in July, flat and hot and slightly too bright, the kind of light that makes you feel like the city is working too hard. The studio itself is cool. Climate control to the temperature that cameras like and human beings more or less tolerate. The audience is in their seats. They have been there since early, because that is how tapings work. You show up early and you wait, and then the show starts and the wait becomes worth it. They are mostly women. Various ages. Some in their 20s who know the view from social media clips and have been curious about the actual experience. Some in their 40s and 50s who have been watching the show for years and finally got the tickets. Some older, who have watched it since the beginning, who remember when it was new, who have watched the hosts change around the permanent fixture of Joy Behar. They came for a Friday morning. They did not know exactly what they were going to get. They got the Madonna conversation. They got Joy Behar declaring 50 is the cutoff. They got Anna Navarro saying who died and made you the Virgin Mary. They got Sarah Haynes announcing she is not a hoochie shower. They got Alyssa Farah Griffin pointing at Billie Eilish as evidence that covering up is its own kind of statement. They got the whole conversation, with all of its warmth and humor and the specific, particular energy of women talking to women about things that matter to women. And they laughed. Really laughed. Not because they were told to. Not because a sign lit up above their heads. But because it was funny. Because Anna Navarro is funny. Because the Virgin Mary line is objectively a great line. Because the follow-up with the coconut shells and the band-aid was even better. Because Sarah Haynes saying I am not a hoochie shower is one of the most specifically accurate self-descriptions ever delivered on daytime television. They laughed because they were in the presence of real people having a real conversation and something genuinely funny happened. And they will remember that morning for a while. Not necessarily the details. Not necessarily who said exactly what in exactly what order. But the feeling of it. The warmth of it. The particular experience of being in a room where women were talking to each other with honesty and humor and genuine affection. That is rarer than it should be. And it matters more than it might seem. Let me be direct about something. The conversation about Madonna and Joy's cutoff and Anna's Virgin Mary line and Martha Stewart and Billie Eilish, on the surface, this is a light entertainment segment about celebrities and clothes and the politics of aging in pop culture. But underneath it, something else is happening. Underneath it, a group of women are negotiating what it means to own themselves. To own their bodies, their choices, their visibility, their presence in the world. To make decisions about how they appear and how they present themselves and what they reveal and what they keep private and what they owe other people's comfort, and to make those decisions on their own terms, without reference to a rule that somebody else invented. That is what Joy's cutoff was really trying to say. Not I have thought deeply about this and arrived at a philosophical position. But I am a woman who has thought about these things personally, and this is where I have landed for myself. And in the way that happens in casual conversation, that personal position got announced as a universal rule. Which is where Anna's joke came in. Because the joke said, gently and hilariously, your personal position is yours. It is not mine. It is not Martha Stewart's. It is not Madonna's. The authority you are claiming over every woman's body is not yours to claim. And the reason that is funny instead of angry, the reason it landed as warmth rather than attack, is because everyone at that table understood that Joy was not actually trying to claim that authority. She was just talking. She was being Joy Behar, which means saying the thing she thinks and letting the room deal with it. And the room dealt with it. By laughing. By pushing back. By adding evidence and counterexamples and personal testimony and one unforgettable image of coconut shells and a band-aid. That is how good conversations work. Not as a formal debate with rules and judges and an official winner, but as an exchange between people who are genuinely trying to figure something out together. Who are bringing their own experience and their own honesty and their own humor and letting all of it collide and seeing what emerges. What emerged from this conversation was something true. There is no cutoff. There is only what each woman decides for herself in her own life with her own body in her own time. That is it. That is the whole answer. And it took Anna Navarro 5 words, the Virgin Mary, and 2 coconut shells to get there. Let me tell you about the women who were watching at home. Because The View has an audience that extends far beyond the studio. Millions of women, across the country, watching in kitchens and living rooms and break rooms and wherever they happen to be at that time of the morning. And for a lot of those women, the Madonna conversation was not abstract. There was the woman in her early 50s who had recently looked at her closet and started removing things. Not because she did not like them anymore, but because somewhere, in the back of her mind, a voice had told her that a woman her age should not be wearing that. Should not be drawing that kind of attention. Should be dressing for the next chapter, whatever that meant. She heard Joy say 50 is the cutoff. And her stomach dropped a little. Because it confirmed the voice. And then she heard Anna say who died and made you the Virgin Mary. And she laughed. And in the laughing, something shifted. The voice got a little quieter. There was the woman in her 60s who had not worn a swimsuit to the beach in 3 years because she was afraid of what people would think. Who watched her grandchildren play in the water from a lawn chair, fully dressed, while her husband swam with them. Who had decided, somewhere along the way, that her body was no longer a body that belonged at the beach. She heard the Martha Stewart conversation. She heard Anna say if I had the thigh gap I would wear 2 coconut shells. She did not stand up and immediately go buy a swimsuit. Real change does not work like that. But something moved. Some small, incremental shift in the calculus. The small voice that said maybe I have been wrong about this. Maybe the cutoff is something I invented and not something that was handed to me by the universe. There was the young woman in her 20s who had never thought about this. For whom 50 was so far away it was practically fictional. Who watched the segment with half her attention while doing something else and thought it was funny. The Virgin Mary line made her snort laugh. She did not think deeply about it. But it went somewhere. Filed away in the part of the brain that stores things for later. For the morning when she is 50 and someone tells her there is a cutoff and she needs the resource of knowing that someone fired back with 5 perfect words and everyone in the room fell apart laughing. That is what television does at its best. It goes somewhere. It plants something that you do not always know is there until you need it. Joy Behar got the last laugh. Sort of. After Anna's Virgin Mary line. After the coconut shells and the band-aid. After Sarah's declaration of non-Hoochishauer identity. After the Martha Stewart conversation. After the whole wonderful, chaotic, human exchange. Joy Behar sat at that table, laughing, and said, I don't even like the doctor to see me naked. I bring a blindfold with me just in case. And the table erupted again. Because this is the other thing about Joy Behar. She is a comedian. And a comedian's instinct, when they get hit with a great joke, is not to sulk. It is to find the next joke. To use the moment. To take the attention that is now on them and do something with it. She turned her own position into material. She is not saying 50 is the cutoff for everyone. She is saying, for me, personally, in my actual life, I do not want to be seen by anyone, including medical professionals. And I have developed coping strategies involving blindfolds, which is both funnier and more honest than the original declaration. And it changed the energy of the whole thing. Because suddenly Joy was not the person being argued with. She was the person who understood that the argument had gotten away from her and decided to make it funnier instead of doubling down. That is wisdom. The specific, comedic, very Joy Behar kind of wisdom. You said the thing. The thing turned into a moment. The moment is now bigger than you. Let it be funny. And the studio laughed with her. Not at her. With her. Because that is the difference between a group of women having a conversation and a group of adversaries scoring points off each other. When it is working, when the affection is real and the humor is real and the argument is in good faith, even the person who started on the losing end of the joke gets to end up laughing. Joy Behar ended up laughing. And that, in a world that is often too serious about itself, is worth something. I keep coming back to 5 words. Who died and made you the Virgin Mary? Because I think there is something in those 5 words that goes beyond the specific moment. Something that is useful in a lot of different contexts. A kind of tool. A tool for the moment when someone declares a rule that was not theirs to declare. A tool for the moment when someone draws a line about what you are allowed to do or be or wear or say, and you need a response that is not angry and is not defensive but is something else entirely. Something that deflates without attacking. That questions the authority without questioning the person. That points at the absurdity of the claim without making the claimant feel terrible. 5 words. And all of that inside them. Anna Navarro did not come up with those words in that moment. Language like that develops over time. Over years of being in situations where you needed a response and sometimes had one and sometimes did not, and eventually, through the accumulation of all of it, you develop a library. A set of tools that are ready when the moment comes. But the moment has to come too. You have to have the instinct to reach for the right tool when it appears. On that Friday morning, the moment came. Anna reached for the tool. And the studio erupted. And Joy Behar laughed. And the audience went home with something they would remember. Not a political argument. Not a policy position. Not a takeaway they would have to look up later to verify. Just a feeling. The feeling of being in the room when something real happened. When the perfect line met the perfect moment. And 5 words was enough to say everything. And that is the story. Not a story about celebrities, exactly. Although it started with one. Not a story about daytime television, although that is where it happened. Not even really a story about age or bodies or what women are allowed to do with either. It is a story about what happens when people are honest with each other. When they say what they actually think. When the joke that is also true finds the moment that was waiting for it. When 5 words lands harder and more permanently than 500 words would have. It is a story about the particular kind of warmth that comes from people who genuinely like each other disagreeing in public. Who can say you are wrong and make the other person laugh in the same breath? Who can puncture a pretension without puncturing a person? Anna Navarro and Joy Behar have been at that table together for a long time. They know each other. They trust each other. And that trust is what made the Virgin Mary line a gift rather than an attack. Trust is the ingredient that makes honesty possible. And humor is the form that honesty takes when it is delivered with love. Who died and made you the Virgin Mary? 5 words. Real laughter. A studio full of women, at a table, talking to each other, the way women have always talked to each other when they are being real. That is the show. That is the moment. That is what we will remember. Thank you for watching. We will see you in the next one.